what things would you do differently if you were building Elethor today?
Oh, man.
Yeah, welcome again, Zaalah. Welcome, everybody. This is the PBBG podcast, episode 5. Today, we're going to be here talking with Zaalah about Elethor, which I'm super excited about. I feel like, I've been keeping an eye on the game for a while. I've played a little bit. I do feel like I would love to know more about it, though. So hopefully we could get some good insight, get some questions from chat, and see where it goes.
Yeah, sounds good. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast version after this is a live stream. So we'll be interacting with probably viewers and stuff like that just in the chat. We'll try and verbalize the questions and what are being said before we respond, just so you have more context. But yeah, we're not talking into the void. There's not a third person here that you can't hear that we can hear. We're just talking to the chat. So
awesome. Good explanation. All right. So before we start and get into it too much, for anybody who doesn't know, you want to give a quick elevator pitch, quick summary of what Elethor is?
Yeah, so Elethor has been around for about 2 years now. It launched in January of 2021. It's a kind of sci-fi themed RPG PBBG. And so it's basically log in, you fight rats, you fight monsters, they get their drops, and then you use those drops to craft gear, which makes you stronger to fight stronger monsters, and so on. The loop continues. So it's a little bit different than some other PBBGs you might be familiar with. And so a lot of other PBBGs are kind of infinite progression where you just kind of level up and level up and level up. Elethor has kind of some hard caps on the way that you can improve. And so there's different tiers of gear is kind of one of the main methods of progression. And so we're currently on tier 10 is the highest level that you can get up to with your gear. And once you get up to that, you can, empower it and improve your gear, but then you're kind of capped until the next tier comes out. And so from that method, it kind of gives players bursts of play and then a little bit more AFK time and downtime between tiers, but it also creates kind of a catch-up mechanic that I haven't really seen in a lot of other games that don't wipe, at least. There's a little bit of a different take on the genre from that perspective. So, but yeah, in essence, it's just an RPG. Level up your character, get stronger, so you can fight more stuff, so you can get stronger ad nauseum.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like it's a thoughtful take on pacing, the way you're describing it. You're getting some good ebbs and flows as you go as a player.
Yeah, that's the intent. It's changed a lot in the last 2 years. And so the new player experience, if you're playing for the first time today, probably is not the same way that I originally intended. Some parts will feel really fast and you might hit some walls that feel kind of weird. But overall, the intent is, sort of the last 30 to 40% of the end game is kind of a longer grind. It takes a lot, more time to invest. It's a lot more expensive. But then as soon as tier 11 comes out, for example, players will be selling their old maxed out tier 10 gear. So if you're kind of coming up, behind in the ranks, you can get that stuff for way cheaper than it would cost you normally. Mm-hmm. So it does kind of naturally smooth out progression and sort of make it easier to start competing at the end with some of the top players.
Cool.
From that perspective, at least. There's other places where catching up is a lot harder, and we're working on some solutions for that. But in general, a lot of your core progression, is easier to catch up on.
Cool. Well, so taking a step back, do you mind giving us some backstory about how the game actually came to be, its early stages, or how you actually went about creating it?
Yeah. So a long time ago, when I was a kid, I just loved making games. And so I would make board games and games for my siblings to play. I'd be the kid in the neighborhood making up the arbitrary rules for how you're allowed to play this specific variant of freeze tag. I just loved creating rules and creating games. And so that's kind of always been part of just my nature, my personality. I went to college and got a degree in marketing because I thought I wanted to do social media marketing. And then I started doing it and I decided I don't want to do that. Got into sales for a little bit, decided I don't want to do that. Found development. And I was like, wow, this is super fulfilling. It's super fun. I really enjoy this. And one of the best ways to learn from my experience is to have a really big project that's larger than your skill set and then just try and tackle it a piece at a time. And so I've heard a lot of, advice from well-meaning game developers saying, pick something really small for your first game, recreate Pong, make an asteroids variant, something like that. But I don't like Pong. I don't like asteroids. So that's not really exciting to me. And so I thought, hey, what if I make a brand new PBBG, from scratch? And I had no idea how to do multiplayer. I had no idea how to do database. I didn't know any of that kind of stuff. And so learning about it sort of from scratch and using that to build the whole game was kind of like the motivation was sort of to learn, but I also just love game design. And so being able to sort of do that from the beginning and sort of create this idea that I had for like a sci-fi RPG. And it sort of has evolved a lot over the years. Like one of the earliest features I remember implementing in Elethor was locations. You could go to different locations, and each location there'd be different monsters to fight, different like things to gather, different crafting recipes you could find. And that doesn't exist in the game anymore because it kind of sucked. It wasn't fun. So having developed that entire feature out and learning about all that stuff and what it takes to make it, and then actually implementing it, being like, nah, I don't like this, and throwing it out. It's been a very evolutionary process. But overall, it's been, I want to create something that I can kind of own, something that I'm passionate about, that I care about, that's bigger than what I think is possible to do. And that's been, a great learning experience along the way.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a journey. Sounds satisfying too. Maybe, I don't know if frustrating is the right word, but when you create something like you're saying, it doesn't quite work out. There is a frustration there, I'm sure, but it's also a lesson. It makes you a better, designer. It helps you kind of just hash things out and get to where eventually you want the vision to be.
Yeah. It took me like a good couple of weeks actually to like actually cut the feature. Like I had a couple people alpha testing it, and they were like, why is this in the game? Like, why is this even a thing? It makes no sense. And in my mind, I have this, all game designers have this, where they've got like, I have this vision, this pie in the sky of like my dream and what it's going to look like and how it's going to feel. And then you put it out there and it's like not what you thought it was going to be. And that was definitely one of those things where it's like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. And so, it did take a couple of weeks for me to like hack and slash that limb off of my baby, right? And just kind of throw it in the trash. Yeah. But I think the game overall is better for it. So I think that's an evolutionary process that like all game devs go through. Like I'm sure you have too with Imperial Conflict. Like there's been ideas you've had, or like, hey, we could add this, or maybe you did add something. And then at some point it was like, actually, we're just going to go ahead and cut that whole thing. So
well, it's important to be able to admit it to yourself, because sometimes people don't do that, and then obviously the game suffers. So it's nice to hear that you're growing with the game as appropriate yourself.
And I'm sure that we've like lost players along the way too. Like I'm sure there's been people who, I remember when the game first launched, you could have crafting as a skill. So you would level up crafting, and then as you leveled it up, you were able to unlock better recipes, which in theory sounds fun, but in practice, it ended up being entire guilds of players funneling resources to one person so they could craft everything, get all the experience, and then send it all back to people, which is not fun, right? And it creates this imbalance thing. It's not the vision you're going for. And so having to cut that out definitely upset some people, like people who had invested into their crafting, and then, okay, there's no crafting levels anymore. Feels bad. Yeah. But it's one of those things where the sooner you can make that decision, like the healthier the game is in the long term. At least that's been my experience so far. It's only been a couple of years. I know some of these games have run for a decade or longer, but it's some of that kind of stuff is sort of things that you learn along the way.
Sure. Well, speaking of crafting, I see on the homepage on Elethor, it says everything in Elethor is crafted, and progression relies on gathering materials to craft new gear. Can you explain a little bit what that means, like in terms of like everything being crafted and how that pertains to the game experience?
Yeah, so that's probably not 100% accurate anymore. There's definitely a lot of things in the game that are not just purely crafted. Like a lot of people, I mean, you'll get a lot of the raw materials and you'll turn them into things. The original intent for that was kind of every tier of gear, and it's still set up this way. So every tier of gear, you have to fight specific monsters. Monsters are named in Elethor. And so like tier 1 gear is scrivet gear. So you go and you fight scrivets, and they drop scrivet pelts, and you use those to craft scrivet gear. And that gets you strong enough to go and fight the next tier of monster, whatever that ends up being. And so from that perspective, everything is still crafted. Like you have to go out, you have to actually kill those monsters and gather those materials, and then turn those materials into the equipment. If you want to empower your gear or reinforce your gear, which are ways you can upgrade it, you have to go and craft those upgrade components and then use them on your gear, right? So there's a bit of, it's not as straightforward as like you have gold and then gold buys you everything. There's a little bit of hunting around of like, okay, I need these pieces for this and I need these pieces for that. And you kind of have to look for things from that perspective, which I think adds another element to the gameplay as well.
Sure. So, yeah, it sounds like there's different dimensions, I guess, different layers. Yeah, cool. All right, well, getting on to, I guess, more recent happenings. I took a look at your some of your recent patch notes as of this most recent December. I see there's something about Cybernetics, which sounded pretty intriguing. I'm not too familiar with how this works exactly, but could you give a brief summary of what that feature is looking like that you're getting into?
Yeah. So if anyone's played like Path of Exile or you've seen their skill tree, the inspiration was kind of from there. And so it's not nearly as crazy or as in depth as Path of Exile skill tree, but it is that concept, right? So you have a skill tree, you have some starting nodes, and then as you invest into those nodes, new nodes unlock, which have other stats or unique stats that you can only get from Cybernetics. And so that's kind of the feature. It's sort of an end game feature. So players are using a currency called data chips. Data chips are normally in the early game, it's a currency that you use to get masteries, and masteries are ways you can power up your character in a permanent way. So things like gaining more ore, or maybe your action timer can speed up if you get fatigued, or things like that. Just kind of quality of life improvements that you unlock. But then once all those are unlocked, there's not really anything for you to spend your data chips on. And so this was sort of an end game feature that I was able to create that kind of lets players sink a lot of their data chips into this system in order to get skill points, and then assign those skill points throughout the skill tree however they want. And so, yeah, it's a pretty massive skill tree. I've designed it in a way where I can kind of add more nodes to it, and more nodes will be coming in future patches. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's my first time playing with Canvas, with that programming API in the browser. And so kind of learning how that works, and making it look visually appealing, and having, hover effects and stuff like that was a whole new thing for me. But yeah, it's like a big skill tree, invest into, get stronger. It's a permanent bonus. A lot of the bonuses in Elethor are temporary. So like gear is temporary. You have it and then you sell it, and those bonuses go away when you sell it. You got to craft new gear. But Cybernetics is a permanent thing that just always gets added onto your character.
That's pretty cool. I like the concept. And I also like the experience of, the dev experience you're talking about playing with Canvas. That sounds like, I don't know about you, but when I play other games and I see skill trees, I'm excited, because it's such a cool way to evolve your character. So that must have been fun, just kind of tinkering and figuring out how that visual experience or how you want it to look like there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was definitely designed more as an end game feature. So I'm laughing now because there is a meme that the community put into my Discord that was like Cybernetics as a patch. You think you're like what you think of and you imagine it, and it's like this fully decked out transformer ready to go kick butt. And then it was Cybernetics in reality, and it was like this ugly, Optimus Prime stuffy toy that looked like trash. Because it's like you kind of expect it to be this core gameplay progression. Like people think Path of Exile, they think, oh, this is going to be like the game. Yeah. And then they get it, and it's like, no, this is kind of a niche endgame feature, which kind of feels bad because it looks good, but kind of a niche endgame feature. It's not necessarily, everyone shouldn't invest 100% into it, right? It's kind of for the uber wealthy, the super rich. But seeing it all come together and seeing how it fits into the larger vision of the game, and seeing how it's like, hey, this is another thing that players can do to invest in, another way to power up. It's more use for their currency. It just feels good to have more options as a player of how to, power up.
Yeah, cool. That's sounds like quite a lot of depth, but really sounds very intriguing, as most of the game does. If anybody hasn't checked it out, by the way, let me see if we can drop a link real quick in here in the chat to the website. It's elethor.com. Let me see. There we go. Feel free to check it out if you guys haven't already. I think we have some of your players in the chat and some of the PBBG community members here as well. So speaking of the patch notes, I did also see that there is a second anniversary event going on this month. So you guys, I take it, obviously that means you guys have been going on for 2 years. So congrats on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Could you give it a little quick summary of what this every 50 actions gain an anniversary present, what players can look forward to with that? Yeah.
So the entire event kind of infrastructure is sort of a new feature that I have kind of created in the last couple of months. So there was the, the Christmas event started end of November, and now the second anniversary event. And I've got plans for February event, stuff like that. And so basically it's just a way that as you do actions, which is kind of the normal ticking progression that players have in the game, it just kind of gives you a little bit of extra rewards, like a little vault or a chest loot box, if you will. That gives you a bunch of different rewards, just like normal currencies that players would want to get. Some fun stuff that's a little bit exclusive, and then some points. You can spend those points in a shop again for more fun stuff, for more exclusives, things like that. So just kind of a little bit of extra rewards to give to players and kind of let them progress a little bit faster. It sort of feels good. Temporary way to kind of spend some extra currency, stuff like that. So
that's nice. It's nice to give those rewards, especially to the people who've been around for a little while. Give the kudos to them for being part of the community. If they've been there for going on 2 years, I guess that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And I found it's really fun to like, I've always enjoyed as a player games that have regular events, even if you're not always putting out brand new systems and brand new content for like to play with, having like, hey, here's the, the summer solstice event, or here's like the fall event, stuff like that. Even if it's something small, just kind of keeps things fresh. It lets me create some new strategy. It lets me kind of try and optimize that event. And then you can kind of rehash the same event idea multiple times and stick different theme on it, maybe change out a couple of the variables. But for the most part, it can kind of be, the same event, but players get a lot of like mileage out of it. So I feel like it's a pretty good way to invest as a developer to kind of create a system like that. And then being able to reuse it for timed events kind of keeps the community engaged and also gives them stuff to play with.
Yeah, gives everyone something to look forward to continually. Prevents things from going too stagnant. That's a nice system, I think. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that will be the last I beat you up on the patch notes. I feel like I'm doing so much talking here, but there's so much to get into. It's really hard not to kind of dive deep in here. But yeah, this is all really great sounding. I really like, by the way, that you keep such extensive patch notes. It's I feel like it's not only just useful for right now, but going back, a year from now, it will be interesting for you and the players and everyone to look back at where Elethor was or where it is right now compared to where it will be in a year. It's a nice little I guess history.
Yeah, it's like a little time capsule. It's kind of fun. Yeah. Cool. I put a post up on the PBBG subreddit. So if you guys haven't checked it out, it's just r/PBBG on Reddit. But just kind of doing like Elethor a year in review. And I went through all the patch notes that I had released in the last year and just looked at like, hey, what is some of the stuff that I did this year? Because when you're a developer and you're kind of in the midst of it, or even if you're a player and you're like actively playing a game, the course of a year is a long time. And you're like, wait, was that this year? Was that like 5 years ago? I can't remember. Mm-hmm. But being able to look back and see like, wow, this is like all the major stuff that got done in the last year. That's like, it felt really validating. Cause like sometimes I feel like I've worked on Elethor for a long time and like, it's not that much different. It's pretty much the same game. Like, what am I even doing? But then being able to look back and see like, wow, a lot of really good stuff got done. Like it feels a lot better as a game. I can see how these things have paid dividends over the course of the year, and players feel better about the game and all this kind of stuff is like, yeah, it's encouraging. I would encourage anyone like who's developing a game, even if it's not released yet, just go back and look at some of the stuff you've done in the last 6 months. And I'm sure you'll be kind of surprised at how much you've been able to accomplish. And that's always fuel to just keep going.
Absolutely. Because when you're in it every single day, you kind of forget, you lose track of time in a way. And like, you don't realize like, every little bit of progress that you're making is going to compound on itself. Before you know it, you're making substantial gains on whatever your vision is. But like you're saying, it's easy to forget when you're not taking notes or you're not keeping track. So it is good for motivation, but also good for the community to have a sense of their own history as well. So good job,
for sure.
Good job on that. So speaking of the subreddit, I think I saw this on the subreddit. I'm not actually sure. I don't think this was in the patch notes, but I saw that you did a charity drive for a local food bank. I thought that was pretty cool. Could you tell us a little bit about how that went?
Yeah. So for like a lot of the major Elethor events, I feel like I just enjoy being generous. That's going to sound like a total douchey thing to say. But I just really enjoy like being generous. Like my wife and I, we have a certain amount of money we set aside every month into a fund that we don't get to use. We can only give it away. And so we're just kind of looking for ways that we can be generous and help other people out. And if people are in need or if they're trying to raise money for something or whatever. And so I kind of wanted to extend that into like Elethor, like as a developer, like a lot of what you create kind of takes on your personality in a way. And so I wanted to make that part of what Elethor is about. And games in general, especially browser games, just have such low overhead. Like so much of what we end up taking home financially ends up being profit. And so the anniversary or the Christmas event, every major event, I try and do some type of donation thing to go along with it. And in the past, I've had the community vote on what sort of charity they want things to go to, and that's been successful. But for this one, like there's been a need in my community where I live lately for people who are defined as like food insecure. And so people who they can afford food, but they cannot afford like healthier food. They can't have like certain options. Maybe they're limited in how much they can buy. Like they're not at the level where they qualify for food stamps, but they are at the level where it's like that they're struggling to put food on the table. And so this local food bank has like an attached aquaponics greenhouse. And so they have fish and then like lettuce that they grow and like a couple of other fresh things. And it basically is run by volunteers. And the whole thing is just to be able to provide fresh produce to the community. And so they were like, hey, we're growing, we're getting more and more demand. if you want to help out financially, like let us know. And so I was like, hey, this is a perfect thing for an Elethor event. And so I let everybody know, like, hey, everything like for this donation event will go toward the local food bank. And then the event ran for like 5 weeks, I think. And so the way that I do donation events on Elethor, I think I copied Blah from Kessler, or maybe I came up with the idea on my own. I can't remember. But basically it's like kind of a gamified version. So like from $0 to $500 of donation is 20%. So 20% of the total revenue that Elethor makes gets donated. But as soon as that donation amount hits 500, then it levels up to 25%. And then once you get to another certain benchmark, it levels up again to 1,500. And so on the homepage of Elethor, there's like, some boxes that light up and turn green whenever you hit the benchmarks, and the progress bar fills up and resets. And it's like this big thing. Mm-hmm. And so there were people who were, buying packages that were on sale during the Christmas event. And they were like, hey, let's get together and like push this over the line, which, is good for me as a developer because like I'm making money from that. But it's also good because, over a third of what I made for those 5 weeks went straight to the local food bank. It ended up being like almost $3,000, I think. Wow. So yeah, it's just a good way to like use my passion and use my skills and be able to like actually make a difference in the community. Like where I lived is just like, it's great. It's great.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Good job to you. Good job to your community. That's great news all around. I like how you're saying that, those kinds of, you build something and it's an extension of yourself. So if you have a drive to help, that gets expressed through your art, through your work. That's really wonderful. And what a cool thing too for your local, community. Benefiting through your international gaming community. That's such a cool like intertwining of worlds. That's really awesome. Good job to all of you guys. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So it was the trade lock system. I'm not sure if this relates to what you were saying earlier about a system having been redesigned more than once, but there was a note here about trade lock going through another change. Can you do a brief summary of what that is exactly?
Yeah. So in general, like any of you who run browser games know that there's a problem with multis. So people basically creating multiple accounts and then using multiple accounts to like either feed one main account or to cross trade out or, whatever. And it's very hard to track down these multi accounts. Like Netflix doesn't know how to track down these multi accounts, like password sharing and stuff like that. And so as a solo dev trying to figure out, okay, what can I do to disincentivize people from creating multi-accounts? It's against the game rules in Elethor. Like creating multiple accounts and feeding one main account is not in the spirit of the game. It's not kind of how it was designed and balanced. And so that's against the rules, but people are breaking that rule, obviously. Like as soon as it is profitable to break it, you'll have people kind of pushing the boundaries. And so the purpose of this rule was to kind of help discourage people from creating multis and also giving the mod team sort of some gates to check people if they looked suspicious or looked like multis. And so the general gist of the game the system is basically as soon as you create a brand new account, that account is trade locked. And so you can use the market. The market is built on like a buy sell system, like the stock market, the US stock market. And so it's hard to game that because your listing is in with everybody else's buy and sell listings. So if you sell something for really expensive, no one else can buy it because all the other listings will get fulfilled first. So it becomes very like unrealistic to do it that way. Mm-hmm. And you can also receive items from other people. So you can use the market, you can receive items from people, but the trade lock means you can't send items directly to another person. So for like 99% of brand new accounts, they don't care. Like they're brand new, they're trying to figure out the game, they're investing in their own account. So who cares if I can't send so-and-so these items directly? It doesn't really matter. And as soon as you reach a certain quest in the progression, that becomes automatically untrade locked. So as soon as you like beat a specific dungeon in the game that kind of signifies, hey, you've gotten to this level of progression, you've invested enough to be able to beat this, then you're untrade locked. You can trade with whoever you want. And so we as the mod team are able to kind of see who is on that level of progression and kind of look into accounts and see, hey, like, are you a legitimate account, or does it look like someone who's just kind of playing the game to get to that point so they can help funnel someone else? And it's become a really useful tool for the mod team to be able to track down multi-accounts and sort of prevent some of that abuse from happening. I'm sure there's still people who are getting through the cracks. As always, like people are very creative. It's kind of a game of whack-a-mole to try and stop it. But it is definitely, cat and mouse too. But it's definitely it's definitely helped a lot with being able to prevent that. We've been able to catch a lot of people who were kind of abusing the rules, and it's helped. So the recent change that you're seeing probably in the patch notes or wherever that was kind of structuring it in a way to where that system is more automated and requires less hands-on from the mod team, because it was starting to get, a little bit bothersome having to manually go through all these accounts.
Sure.
And so now that it's more automated and we just kind of check stuff, it makes it a lot easier on us. It's less burden, and it still is effective at catching potential cheaters. So
that's great. That frees you guys up for all the other work that I'm sure that you have to do.
Yes.
That's cool. That makes sense. With Imperial Conflict, we have a similar problem. I don't think our market is as sophisticated as your guys' is, but we had a similar thing with people creating new accounts just to game the market. So we don't have quite the same mechanism in place, but we call it a galactic trading license. You come in and you can't really just trade right away. There's a time delay. It's not really like a progression or a mechanic unlock. It's a time thing. But either way, like you're saying, that people will get creative. If people want to cheat, they're going to. You can't totally get around that or squash it entirely, but you can make it more difficult. And that I think that's helps a lot if you introduce enough friction that it becomes less appealing to bother with it. So hopefully that will looks like sounds like it's improving for you guys. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
I saw something about let me see where it was in my notes. Don't mind me, I'm juggling a couple of different things here. Oh yeah, it was the combat. I saw that you had made some changes to pre-calculate things as opposed to doing calculations on the fly. Was that just for mostly like a performance thing, or was there other does that have other impacts outside of that in terms of the way the players experience it? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's definitely a performance thing. I'd love to write like a long blog post about this at some point. But basically the way that the game works is every 6 seconds, if you have an action, so players have a queue of actions and then they tick down every 6 seconds. So every 6 seconds, the server would process your action, but the way that it processed, it would stick it into a queue, and then the computer would just grab it, process the job, and spit it out. Then grab the next one, process the job, spit it out. But we've been growing, and so the number of active players that we have, that system has slowed down significantly. Like it was getting bogged down where you were waiting minutes sometimes for your action to get processed, which means if you're waiting a minute for it to get processed on a 6 second action, like you're not actually getting 6 second actions, right? Mm-hmm. Like you've got to wait for the next one to process. Yeah. And so that was creating a situation where like players were getting, like you're supposed to be getting about 14,400 actions per day if you had perfect actions. Like it's different now because there's different skills that let you get more, but generally you'd get about that many. And players were getting like 4,000. Like it was like very, very bad. And so it felt bad to play because you would be expecting, your progress bar would fill all the way up and then it would just stay full. Mm-hmm. And then maybe it would jump around a little bit and then it would stay full again. And you're like, is this working or is it broken? Like it was very confusing. And then it felt bad from a progression standpoint because like everything in the game is balanced around expecting players to get 14,000-ish actions per day. But if you're only getting 4,000, all of a sudden you're progressing way slower than was originally intended. And so the game just felt slower too. You get less gold, less drops, less experience, everything. And so this rework basically took everything, instead of trying to process jobs one at a time, it would take the job, I call it the fight job, is what it's called in the code. And it would say, when was the last time this was processed? And then it would run a calculation saying, okay, if it's been 64 seconds, that means we need to process 10 actions worth and then leave 4 seconds left over. And so it would take that, chunk them all into 10 actions, grab all the info from the database, and then process 10 actions really, really fast, and then spit it out. And so you were always getting the full number of actions per day, even if it's not happening every 6 seconds on the dot. And so that's like drastically freed up like computing resource. It's made it a lot easier. Like if you're not online, it waits like 5 or 6 minutes before it processes your actions and does them in one chunk. So if you are online, you'll see stuff tick pretty regularly and smoothly. But if you're not online, you don't care. Like if it takes 5 or 10 minutes for you to process your actions, who cares? Like as long as it's processing them at all. Yeah. And so that was like a massive rewrite. Like I any developer who's maintained a code base for more than 3 months knows that everything turns into spaghetti really fast. And Elethor is like going on 4 years now of being developed. It's like, so it was a lot of spaghetti I had to dig through and like figure out, what is this? Like, what is this doing? I have no idea what I was thinking.
Hopefully you left decent comments.
This time around, I wrote a lot of comments. Like I used to be in the mindset of like, self-documenting code. If you write it well, you don't have to have comments. And that's like, screw that. I'm going to do self-documenting code and I'm going to write a ton of comments. So next time I come here, I can save myself all the headache.
Yeah. Then leave.
So yeah, that's what that was. Yes. Yeah. I have a couple of comments on my code that are basically berating me for this is bad and you should feel bad. Don't ever do this again. This is an ugly hack, stuff like that. So
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But yeah, that entire action rework like smoothed things out, made it a lot easier for players to like get into the game. It felt better. It's more responsive. You get more actions. It's like drastically cut down on computing costs, like as far as what the servers take to run things. Like it's been a huge gain that way. Yeah.
Well, congrats on that. I mean, that's good for all kinds of reasons.
Thank you.
It's for satisfying when something like that happens that does what it's supposed to do as well, because sometimes, it's not always that way. Sometimes you do a massive rewrite, come to find out that it doesn't actually help the way you thought it would help. And that's always a bummer. Yeah. So the fact that, it actually did it worked as intended, let alone, saving the server costs and all that kind of stuff. That's awesome. Good job.
Yeah. Yeah. On that patch day, I remember like I was sweating through my shirt because like patch day in general, like is always stressful, right? You're pushing out a bunch of code that like you've tested and you've like double checked it, but it never works the way it's supposed to. And so pushing that out and like on a normal basis is like, stressful, but it's like, hey, I completely rewrote how all actions work. Like I took a backup of the database. I went through how to roll back, like in my head, I had like written instructions on how to roll stuff back in case it got bad. Like I was so stressed. I was ready to like, mess with it all day long. And it actually ended up going pretty smooth, which is, pure luck to be completely honest, but it felt good to roll that out.
Well, it helps when you test and, test on test. And I mean, that's how it is with me anyway. When I have massive updates like that, when I do get to them, like I'm paranoid that like, I'll test it on dev and I'll test it on whatever. Then I can test as much as I want. And then in my mind, I think it's just going to break when I put it on production. I need to test it again.
Yep.
And before you know it, you're just wasting time and, diminishing returns and all that kind of stuff. But, it does help at least to over test, obviously, I think anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was having a conversation earlier today with Ian, who's been on previous episodes of the podcast, and he just had a huge patch today for his game and had some issues, and there was some weird dupe bugs. He ended up having to do like a rollback, but basically he told me part of the issue was that in dev he used MariaDB, and in production he used MySQL, which is supposed to be the same, but the way it was parsing certain numbers in a certain way, it just wasn't functioning. But yeah, he was like, I tested stuff and I double checked it and I have no idea what's going on. And it's just the reality. It's the nature of being a developer. Yeah.
Yeah. The most random seeming stuff will bite you sometimes. I had a situation recently. I just in the last year or so put everything on Docker. And for those who don't know it, Docker is it's a tool that helps you kind of have consistent development just environments based on where your code lives. So if you're writing code locally, you're testing it on your own computer, that should look exactly as it looks on the dev server, which should look for the most part exactly as it looks on the production server. It saves a lot of headache. And I thought I saved myself all that headache. Come to find out that, something broke on production. Like, what could this possibly be? Everything's supposed to be the same. And all that it was is that my production MySQL instance had a different MySQL configuration setting. And I just totally spaced on it. So that's how it goes sometimes. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, good job on that update. That sounds like it was well worth it.
It's one of those things that as a developer, and as a game designer in general, right? Like you want to create features, like you want things that are fun for your players to play with. This was not fun. It's not really a feature. It's quality of life. You're trying to fix something that was been broken. It took a lot of time, but I think it's good for all game developers to go back, spend a little bit of time. Okay, what do I need to improve? What's kind of been broken or been okay, but it's not really okay. And those quality of life updates and that kind of that code maintenance just pays dividends in the long term. So there's stuff I've been able to do now, adding features where before I'd be no, that would just stress the servers out even more. So I would just say no to an entire feature, where now it's of course I can do that and not be afraid of, what it'll cost compute wise. So it's super, super liberating.
Yeah. Well, it's worth it to clean house once in a while, take care of the tech debt and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, cool. So a little while ago, before we started the call here, you mentioned that you want to talk about the mining rework that's coming. Do you care to give us some insight onto that?
Yeah, so mining is one of those archaic systems in Elethor that's been around since the very beginning, and it's kind of grown a little bit in leaps and lurches over the last couple of years. But in general, it's sort of fallen behind the rest of the game, and it's very hard to balance. It's a lot of that has to do with when I designed the system. I kind of was designing it around sort of level 100 mining being the max, and expecting players to take a long time to get there. But of course, as you add new features and add new experience buffs and new ways to get ore and stuff like that has massively outpaced it, where players are now level 160, 170, and there's just not enough stuff for them to do. It's kind of, mining has sort of become an AFK thing. There's not really a whole lot to really do. It kind of feels bad. And so the mining rework is kind of a look at sort of fixing a lot of the core problems with mining, but also reimagining, okay, if I were to design this system from scratch again, what would it look like? And so there's a lot of complexity that I'm still working through before that patch gets released, as far as how does that plug into all the other systems in Elethor? How much ore you get at a certain level is indicative of how much you can level up, this ability over here. So if I mess with mining too much, it'll kind of skew that over there, which skews this over here, which breaks, you know what I mean? That kind of has cascading effects. Mm-hmm. And so trying to figure out a better way to balance that. And so there's a couple of things that I've kind of landed on that I feel like will make mining a bit more interesting, a bit more engaging, and also solve a lot of problems. So the first one is infinite node. And so right now there's different resource nodes that you can mine from, and resource nodes all have different density and purity, where density is how fast you can mine it and purity is how much you get when you mine it. And so in my mind, it's an interesting choice that you want to go and mine SK6, for example. You'll go and look and see, okay, this node has high density, this one has high purity. Which one do I want? Which one am I going to pick? Oh, this one has higher experience. Do I want the one with higher experience? And it creates some interesting choice. But in reality, what happens is people are kind of not really doing that. They're sort of just picking highest density, or maybe they don't pick anything at all. And the number of players that are mining is growing, and players are getting better and better at mining more and more ore. And so those nodes are emptying out faster. Every node has a certain amount of ore in it. And so over the last 2 months, I've 10x'd the total amount of ore in these nodes twice. So 100 times more ore than before. And we're still getting close to having issues with ore, all the nodes running out, right?
Oh, wow.
And then there's nothing to mine, and people are stuck mining nothing, and that's no fun. So one of the mining reworks is going to be an infinite node. So basically, you can always mine it. There will always be ore in it. It never expires, and it'll just kind of have baseline stats, nothing too crazy, but it fixes that problem of having to babysit a feature. Having interesting choice is one thing, but having to babysit something is not fun, right? So that's one of the major pieces, which I'm really excited about. Will kind of relieve a lot of headache and let people kind of ease up on babysitting if they want to. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece of it is what we're going to be calling omni nodes. And so these are going to be personal nodes that you create. And when you create them, only you can mine them. And so they'll be kind of smaller nodes. They won't have a ton of ore in them. But it'll basically have supercharged stats. So just basically a ton of density where you mine it super, super fast, 3 times faster than anything else. Or maybe it has a ton of purity where you're getting way more ore every action than you would from anything else. And so it kind of lets players kind of play that node game at their own pace, where, while you're offline, you just mine from the infinite node, doesn't matter. But then when you log back in, you can spend some currency to craft your very own omni nodes. And maybe you have some parameters that you can shift to craft ones that are really good for you. And then you say, oh, cool, I got, these different ones. I'm going to mine them out. And then you get a bunch of extra rewards from it. Just kind of feels good. And so those are kind of 2 main pieces that are going to be part of the mining rework. There's some more pieces that I don't really want to reveal quite yet, just because it's still in the balance phase, right? So I think I put a little Easter egg in the game about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 days ago at this point, where players when you hover over skills in Elethor, it has a tooltip explaining what it does. And so I changed the mining tooltip, instead of saying, oh, you can gather better ore and blah, 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 to also add a piece at the end that said, and you also have a chance to gain a geodata every action. And so people were already oh, what is this geodata? What does this mean? Stuff like that. And the number that I had in the tooltip was a 0.04% chance per mining level per action. And after running the numbers and trying to figure out, okay, how does this work? What does this actually look like? I was like, that's actually too high. So I've already nerfed it in the tooltip. Like people are like, oh, I haven't even seen this, but like, yeah, I've already nerfed it. It's not even out yet, and it's already being nerfed. But yeah, still trying to like figure out the balance of these features and figure out how to make it feel good for the long term and kind of make a permanent solution as opposed to slapping more and more band-aids on a problem. But I'm really excited about that. Just being able to get that out and change, a massive part of the game for the better will just make the quality of life feel better. It's just a new system to play with. Like it'll feel like a whole new feature to the game without having to actually add on a whole new feature. So yeah, I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. That does sound exciting. A lot of thoughtful sounding work. I could hear as you talk about it, the passion and enthusiasm you have for creating. So that's it's always exciting when, as a player, when we hear devs talk about something like they care about it, because it's not always the case, unfortunately. So it's very refreshing to hear your thoughts about the things that you're doing. I'm sure your community appreciates it as well.
Yeah. And honestly, it's fun to sit on a call and just like kind of talk about it. Like I'll tell my wife about it and she like doesn't get it. Like she's passionate and she like, loves that I'm passionate about it and stuff. But if I'm saying, like, what should the geodata drop rate be for on the node creation? She's like, I don't care. Like, and so, yeah, trying to figure that out and stuff and being able to talk about it. Like I've got a really good balance team. I've written a blog post about that, but like just a group of players who are super dedicated that I kind of unveil some of these features to. And then together we can kind of figure out the numbers. Like we play around with spreadsheets a lot, like saying, okay, in 2-3 years, what does this feature look like? And running simulations with that. Just having a community of like highly invested players to like kind of spitball ideas with makes that whole process feel way better. So yeah.
Oh, great. That sounds very valuable. All right. So before we kick it off to Q&A, I do want to ask, do you have anything else you want to talk about for what's coming in 2023, or you want to leave it on mining and on that note, or anything else you want to give us insight into?
Yeah, I mean, mining, I've got a couple of other things that like are sort of things that I'm chewing on. I'm not really sure. Like once these pieces are in place, I feel like the last 6 to 8 months have really been spent on focusing on quality of life, like fixing some longstanding bugs, making the game feel better. I do want to go back and try and like smooth out that new player experience. Like you were asking at the beginning, it kind of feels a little bit janky right now. I would love to create an Android app at some point, an iOS app too, but Apple hates, browser app stuff. And so maybe at some point, but for sure an Android app and kind of try and get some more players into the game and see what they think about it. But there's kind of a couple of different major directions that I can sort of go later on this year as far as like major features and what stuff to invest into. And I haven't quite decided like exactly where I'm planning on investing yet. And so, I mean, my Trello board that I have to keep track of all my Elethor stuff is an ever-growing list of to-dos. And I've got probably 15 or 20 big ideas that could be really cool to like spend a couple of months on and roll out a huge feature. But I'm just trying to think through like, okay, long-term, 2 years from now, what do I want to invest in? What looks good? But yeah, I'm super excited for this year to kind of have a solid base game to work with that I feel like is really, the quality has gone up a lot. And then being able to add fun stuff on top of that, it'll just make it even better.
Yeah, that's great. Sounds like it's going to be an exciting 2023. That's
my hope. That's my hope.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to kick it to Q&A. We'll give you guys a couple of seconds here, or maybe a minute or so while I go read through chat, see if we got any questions already. Feel free to drop in if you have any about the game, or about, I guess, not the game. If you want to talk about your favorite food or something, I don't know, whatever you guys feel like you want to know. We're here. Let me go scroll up through chat, see if I missed anything here. So how's your voice doing? I feel like when I talk about my project, I get excited to talk about it, but then I find my voice gets dry because I do so much talking.
Yeah, it's definitely feeling a little bit dry. I can feel like my throat kind of tightening up just like a little bit. I work from home as a developer, so I never talk to anybody like during the day. When I'm on calls, I ask questions and then other people talk, so I don't really talk a whole lot. So yeah, I'm feeling it a little bit, but we got like 15, 20 more minutes, so yeah. I can hang in there.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned talking to your wife. I have the same problem with Imperial Conflict because I have so many ideas. It's nonstop, just all these ideas, and she's a little more receptive sometimes, and I'm thankful for that. But it's the same thing. Sometimes it's like, oh, I don't think she really cares. I think she's just humoring me.
Yeah, it's definitely good to be aware of that. Earlier on when I was planning stuff, like I would just spitball everything with her, and it was useful, like kind of as a rubber ducking experience. Like when you just say stuff out loud, like you get clarity. But at a certain point, it was like, okay, like this is a little too much. Like I should just kind of tone it back a little bit. So
yeah. All right. Well, while I'm looking through the questions here, if you guys don't know, this is a live podcast we're doing. It's called the PBBG podcast. For PBBG is persistent browser-based games. This is our 5th episode here, our first one that we're doing live. So welcome everyone for being here on the live one. But if you're interested in checking out our other episodes, you can find that at pbbg.com/podcast. There's links to the YouTube videos as well as the different podcasting platforms. So feel free to check that out. And if you're new here, while I'm plugging stuff, my channel here, this is where I'm going to be doing some more of these live podcasts as well as other things that I do on Twitch. So you are more than welcome to follow my channel if you're interested in seeing more of this as well.
So Green Dog, I hear you say partners or pets, just call them differently, Robodogs and Space Farmers. That's pretty good. So partners and pets, like we kind of already have that system with companions. It's just, worded a little bit differently. But yeah, I think there is still something there as far as being able to add some more content, some more, like helper type functions, kind of to sort of put a multiplier on like the resources you gain or the kinds of things that you gain, resources on stats, stuff like that. So it's definitely in the possibility. I'm not 100% like excited about re-implementing what's already been done in other games. Like I kind of like the idea of being able to break the mold a little bit, do something a little bit different. But honestly, Kessler has done a lot of stuff right. And so being able to look at what they've done right and pull from that is, a great idea.
All right. I see a question here from, looks like Bananatron Go is asking, what things would you do differently if you were building Elethor today?
Oh, man. So there's kind of 2 ways to answer this. One is if I were to if I knew the same things that I knew then and we're building it again today, I would probably make a lot of the same mistakes. I think that's kind of the given answer. If I could take all of my experience in having built the game and running the game over the last couple of years and sort of start from scratch and build it today, I feel like I would probably spend more time planning. So one of the things early on that I did with Elethor is I was like, I had a vision. And so I had like an Evernote document that was like, here's what it'll feel like. Here's what it'll look like. And I think a lot of game developers do this where it's like, here's what it will feel like to play the game. But then actually digging in and it's like, okay, what is the actual drop rate of that item? And doing the math of like, if a player is only killing this monster and this is the drop rate, how many drops will they get per hour, per day, per week? And then what does that mean as far as like their gold income? What does that mean for being able to craft things? Like those details are not just details, they are the game. And then when those details sort of surface, that's what the game ends up feeling like. And so people might say, oh, it feels slow. They don't actually mean the game is slow. They mean that the way that the game is being balanced, the amount of resources that they're getting, the number of choices that they're getting to make in a day is what feels slow. And so I think what I would do differently, things that I'm starting to do now is just more planning. And so when I'm thinking through a new feature, it's like, okay, here's what I want it to feel like. Now, how do I get it to feel that way? Maybe I could take this angle or do this with it or have this RNG added, or maybe that feels bad. And so if I have just a static level, or there's a lot of different ways to tackle a problem like this. But I think in general, spending more time planning and thinking through all the details before actually implementing would have saved me a lot of time and prevented me from having a lot of the mistakes that I made.
Sounds reasonable. Some good insight, in retrospect.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we got another one here from Lester the Molester. Question is, how did you get your first 100 players, and how did you keep them around?
So the first, I launched Elethor in an alpha in November of 2020, and then the full release was in January of 2021. And so early on, I posted on the PBBG Discord and I posted on the PBBG Reddit. And I think that's it. I think that's pretty much all I did. And then some players came in for the beta. They tested it out. They told all their friends. A lot of this community is very tight knit. And so it's one of those rare cases where if you build it, they will come. If you create a decent product that people enjoy, the community will talk about it and kind of share it around. And so when I first launched, within the first 24 hours of launching Elethor, I had probably between 600 or 700 players, and I had to double the size of my server 3 times. So 2, 4, 8 times bigger. It was horrible. It was a horrible day. I was I don't know anything about all this stuff. Just everything's on fire. Nothing is working. But yeah, like probably 600 to 800 people. And then the way that I had designed the game, as like I kind of explained towards the beginning, like there's tiers of gear that you go through and then you kind of cap out. And so one of the mistakes that I made was I only had a certain amount of content for players to play with. And so a lot of those players would play, they hit the cap, and then they're like, there's nothing else for me to do other than wait for Zaalah to have the next patch out. And so they quit. And so the players that I did keep around are the ones who were bought into the vision of the game. They thought there was some potential. Honestly, I'm sure there were a chunk of players who stuck around just to cross trade and just wanted to see how the game would evolve. And I think over time, I've been able to maintain that player base just through regular updates, through regular communication. Like knowing that a developer cares about the game that they're building is huge. Like I play the game Foxhole. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's kind of a persistent online war game. And their devs are the worst at communicating with the community. Like they will do stuff and the community's like, why did you do this? What's the thought process? Or there's this game breaking bug. Can we get some sort of statement on it? And nothing, just radio silence. And the game is really good, but they're alienating their community. And I'm seeing the active number of players dropping on Steam that even if they have this great community, like they're just not able to maintain it. Where on the other hand, like you could have a really small browser game made by a developer who doesn't know what he's doing, and having regular communication and just talking with the community and saying like, hey, that's a great idea. I want to incorporate that. Like knowing that you have a hand in building something and just communicating, honestly, is my recommendation for how you would do that. Why people are still around, like at this point, they like the game, or it's just, a bit of Stockholm syndrome where I've been invested for 2 years and I can't quit now. Like I definitely get that. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think there's something there in terms of freshness, not just with the features and stuff like that, but just having like a sense of like presence, I guess is maybe a better way of saying it.
Yeah.
For the developer to be, there and visible. I mean, that people get excited to be part of that, because it's so often where you see games don't have that, and it's kind of like, oh, I guess I'll play it a little more, and feels like a dead game. Yeah, I'm rolling my eyes to myself a little bit because I won't talk about IC right now, but yeah, as a contrast, it's nice to see that you have that freshness there. So good job for that.
Thank you.
Got another question here. Ben Noves is asking, any randomness coming on equipment?
So early on in Elethor, when you crafted a piece of equipment, it could have +3 or -3 on each stat. So let's say the average stat for a rat helm is 1 savagery. It could have all the way from 1 up to 4 down to 0. And so that was kind of the way for the first, I think, 6 or 7 tiers of gear, where there was a lot of this randomness. But that went away in tier 8. And I don't think it's coming back. So I don't see any reason to add that level. Like the amount of grinding that players have to do in order to craft this gear is like a big investment. And so for them to invest all this time and then just end up getting kind of a cruddy piece of gear as the result and having to grind again and hope that the RNG is good just doesn't feel good. It's something that I'm kind of moving away from.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for those details there. Got another one here from, let's see here. Destructor is asking, how do you get an alpha phase that's pretty solid, even though you test it out and you still have doubts?
If you don't have doubts about your game, you're arrogant. So if you've built something and you're like, I'm not sure, it's not quite, like that's totally normal. Everybody feels that. Like I've been developing Elethor for 4 years. It's been live for 2 years. And I put patches out and I still feel like, is this good enough? And honestly, like if it's like you put it out there, you get feedback from the community. If they're like, this is not good enough, then you have your answer. But if they're like, hey, I really like this, it needs more, people are always going to ask for more. I always have this joke with the mod team and other people just in general, but if people are changing what they're complaining about, it means they're doing something right. You'll always have the community complaining. They're always going to be upset about something. But if the issues they're complaining about are smaller and smaller, that's a good thing. Or if the things they're complaining about are shifting, that's also a good thing. That means you're solving problems. And so, yeah, if you think that, your alpha phase, if you feel like it's pretty solid, like you feel like, hey, this is a playable game, someone could come in for the very first time. They know what they're doing. They know what the goal of the game is. Like they have short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals to reach for. They have other players to interact with if it's a multiplayer game. And the base of the game is there. then yeah, put it out and see what people think. If it's a good idea, they'll let you know. If it's a bad idea, they'll also let you know. And feedback at that point is the best way to grow. I could have built Elethor for 4 years from scratch in my basement and never told anybody, and then released it all at once. And it wouldn't be nearly as good as releasing it and updating things with conversations with the community, with having feedback, with having a balanced team. Like that, it just is a growing, natural, evolutionary process. You just have to, at some point, you got to flip the switch and throw it out there and get feedback on this thing that you've built.
That's very true. You should have doubts. Not that it's, there's value. Let's say it that way. There's value in having doubts, because, you're going to give yourself the room to receive the feedback. And that's not a bad thing. So we got one more here. YKK for life is asking, why do I get a debuff when I want to buy actions? What's the thought process behind it? Just to get people to spend more money for credits?
So I'm assuming this is about, so players have a baseline of 1,200 actions that tick down every 6 seconds. Once you hit 0 actions, you get what's called fatigue. And so your actions take 2.5 times longer. So from 6 seconds to 15 seconds. And then that goes all the way down to negative 10,000 actions, and then it stops altogether. And so that process, part of the thought process behind it is to help alleviate the server. And so if you're an active player actively playing the game, then you will be refreshing your actions on a regular basis. And if you're refreshing your actions, then that means, hey, I'm still interested, I'm still playing, the server's going to keep processing them. Where if you go AFK, you don't want to play anymore, you kind of fall off the map, the server will just stop processing those actions after a while. And so that's kind of the original intent behind it. I changed VIP, which is kind of the premium subscription recently, to basically give you more actions. So if you're invested financially into the game, it doesn't have to be like your actual wallet. Like you can spend in-game currency to buy credits to get VIP, and it's worth it. Like you get more gold out of it than you put in. But it ends up giving you more actions that way too, where you can have, an extra 600 and then an extra 10% actions on top of that, to be able to AFK for longer. And then as you progress through the quest line, you also gain more actions, which just get added permanently. There's a buffer system, which gives you more actions. As you just tick through your actions normally, that buffer builds up and then drains once you run out of actions. If you invest in the Spire, which is another like combat feature, some of your rewards at the end of the month include more actions. So it's just a way to reward players who've been playing the game for a long time and basically give them more actions, and they can AFK longer, which is another indicator to the server, right? That like, hey, I'm actually playing the game, I'm being active. So the thought process wasn't just to gate it behind credits just to make money. Like the thought process really was like from the server compute level, like investment level from that, and tying that value to credits just made it easier to scale with the game than tying it to gold, and then gold inflates, and all that is hard to do.
Cool. Great explanation. All right, I think we're slightly over time. I think we got time, or maybe don't have time, but we could do one more question if you're up for it, Zaalah. We'll call it out.
Yeah, I've got a few more minutes for sure.
All right, cool. So last question here. Thank you, everybody, for submitting your questions. If you have more that we don't answer, by the way, or that I missed, feel free to drop into our Discord. It's at pbbg.com. There's a link to the chat up there in the menu, and you can come hang out with us. There are plenty of other players there, other developers. We're a great community. You're more than welcome. All right, last question for today, though. I'm afraid is asking, are you planning to grow corp sizes or maybe add a conglomerate or something?
So in Elethor, instead of having guilds, we have something called corporations, and corporations are right now capped to 20 players. And so as a corporation, there's a couple things that you can do. You can kind of work together with your corp mates to invest in a weekly event called charitable giving, where you basically give items in return for some fame experience. And then you also kind of pool all of your fame levels together, and you can spend those on skill points. So like getting more experience when you're mining, or a bunch of other different combat benefits. And so I don't really have any plans right now to grow corp sizes. I know a lot of other games have like kind of a baseline guild size, and then you can invest in the guild to raise the number of players. And I never liked that concept. I think it leads to kind of snowballing people into a couple of really huge guilds, which might be the intent of the game developer. But for me, I kind of want to be able to spread players out. So if you have 30 people that you want to have in a corporation, just have 2 corporations of 15. So as far as a conglomerate goes, that's one of the features that I think would be really interesting to add at some point in the future. There's just not the player base for it right now. Like if I had a conglomerate of like the top 5 corporations, that would be a significant chunk of like top end players. Maybe there'd be like 3 or 4 conglomerates total, and that's kind of it. And so I do like that idea. Like Kessler did that really well, and being able to borrow from that idea. But I think with the size of the current player base, it would sort of lead to, gumming a bunch of players up in one big blob instead of creating some diversity, which is kind of my goal.
Makes sense. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to wrap it up here. Going to do some quick plugs here. I'm going to drop links in the chat. If anyone here is watching who is not familiar, you can find the game that we're discussing here at elethor.com. Feel free to check that out. Give it a go. See if you like it. It sounds fantastic. I've been playing it for a little bit. There's a great community, as you can see here in chat with us today, and Zaalah is a wonderful developer. So check it out. And on top of that, if you guys are interested about this PBBG community we've been talking about, this is our podcast that we're doing here is for that community. It's a community of developers like myself and like Zaalah and others, and also the players who play their games. It's very, very friendly. A lot of advice for other developers, a lot of game opportunities for other players looking for something to mix it up. Just check it out. Zaalah, you want to leave us with anything before we head out?
No, I'd highly recommend. Check out the game if you like browser games. If not, I don't know what you're doing here or why you've stuck around for an hour. That's super weird. But yeah, check out the PBBG Discord. Come check it out. If there's a question that you asked that didn't get answered, just ping me. I'm at Zaalah in that Discord, and I'll answer your question for you. And yeah, come hang out. We're a pretty friendly community. And if you haven't, go back and listen to some of our older episodes. We talk about like game design and some stuff like that from the browser game perspective. It's pbbg.com/podcast. I'm sure Fuhan will put it in the chat. And yeah, there's some good episodes back there as well that you should go check out. And yeah, we do this once a month. So next month, I don't know what we'll do. It'll be something PBBG related. Maybe it'll even be a live stream, so we could tune in again. But until next time, yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot, by the way, speaking of the podcast and that stuff, we have Patreon, by the way, if you do want to support what we're doing here, getting these last minute plugs out of the way. And we also take polls. If you guys want to suggest any topics that you like hearing about or that you want to hear about, specific games that you want to hear about, all that kind of stuff, you could find that info at the Patreon and also in our Discord. And lastly, if you guys, again, if you like what you're listening to here, you can follow my Twitch channel here, twitch.tv/FuhanPie. That's where these future live podcasts will be, amongst other things that I'm doing on Twitch. Thank you, everyone, for being here today, asking questions, just being a wonderful audience for us both. And again, Zaalah, thank you for taking the time. And good luck with Elethor. I'm super excited for what the next year brings and the year after that and so on.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
See you guys.